Welcome back to the podcast history of our world. Chapter 56, The Origins of China. At the beginning of all things, there was darkness. Darkness and an egg. Inside this egg were the heavens and the earth, and also Pangu. Pangu being a big hairy giant with horns on his head. For 18,000 years he slept inside this egg until he opened his eyes, stretched out his arms, and cracked the shell open. Or he used an axe to do this. Don't think too much about where it came from. Once out of the egg, Pangu used his strength to further keep the two halves of the shell apart from each other. He stood on the murky earth half, the yin, and pushed up at the clear sky half, the yang. Each day the sky grew higher, the earth grew wider, and Pangu grew taller. And for another 18,000 years, he did this with help from the turtle, the dragon, the phoenix, and the qilin, sort of an antlered horse dragony creature. And then Pangu died, and his various body parts became the various parts of the world. I don't know specifically what body parts landed in East Asia, but China contains a staggering amount of geographic diversity, from the Great Tibetan Plateau in the west, to the deserts and steppes up north, the hilly lowlands in the east, and the heavily populated but fertile central plain. Now there won't be a China, or Zhongguo, for quite a while, but the physical features are essentially the same as they were thousands of years ago. And of course, no talk of the geography is complete without mentioning the two great rivers of China. The first being the Yellow River, Huanghe, China's sorrow, starting in the west and running into a part of the Yellow Sea, specifically the Bohai Gulf. It's the chunk of water where China curves into North Korea. And why is it called the Yellow River? Why China's sorrow? Well, it's yellow from the heavy deposits of a type of wind-blown silt called loess, or lus, or even lurs. There doesn't seem to be a set pronunciation for it. But it is yellow, and it can make for some really stellar topsoil. It can also clog up the river, creating little dams essentially, which, when they break, can cause immense devastation from flooding. Farther to the south is the Yangtze River, or Yangtze, which starts in the Tibetan Plateau and empties out into the East China Sea, actually not too far northwest from Shanghai. Floods are a problem here, just like with any other massive river, although the enormous Three Gorges Dam was intended to alleviate some of that. But we'll say nothing of the irony that building it meant flooding numerous archaeological sites. We'll say nothing. So there's a little sampling of geography, but where do we start our story of China? Well, at the beginning, of course. Sometime after Pangu. We'll just sort of put that aside. Also, a quick note before we really start. If you're scratching your head wondering where stuff is or what that name was, remember I've got a brand new website, www.podcasthistoryofourworld.com, and it contains episode breakdowns and maps and links, and I'm working on the older episodes, but it's coming. Anyway, check it out. Alright, time for a little prehistory. The oldest fossil evidence of Homo erectus in China, called Yuanmo man, has been dated to 1.7 million years ago, located in the southwest of the country. But when you're thinking early hominin fossils, you're probably not thinking that. You're thinking of Peking man, who was originally thought to be 500,000 years old, but recent studies indicate it's more like over 700,000. The bones were found at the Zhoukoudian caves in 1921, not too far southwest of Beijing, which was Peking at the time, and the name just never got updated. Unfortunately, the original Peking man fossils were lost at the outbreak of the Japanese invasion of China. They were on their way to America for safekeeping, but they never made it over. Where are they now? It's anyone's guess. Moving quickly, as thousands and thousands of years pass, we leave behind all that Paleolithic stuff for a quick glance at Neolithic China. Possibly the oldest pottery in the world is found here, at the Shanren Caves in southeastern China. But let's talk specific cultures. There's a whole bunch of settlements that sprout up, but I'll mention the biggies. Along the eastern coast of China, think the top of the belly of the rooster. What, you didn't know that China looks like a rooster? Well, now you really have to go to my site and look up the maps. Anyway, around that curvature, 3 cultures flourish. First are the Yangshao on the Yellow River. There's fossil remains here of dogs and pigs, which point to domestication, as well as the telltale signs of a blossoming agricultural society: farming tools, fish hooks, pottery, and residue of wheat and millet. Then there's the Qingliang Gang on the Yangtze, which can be placed at about 5000 BC. Their claim to fame are pottery with a distinct red hue, burial sites with jade jewelry to indicate wealth, and also the first signs of rice cultivation. Not necessarily domestication, because there's evidence that was done probably 3,000 years beforehand, but the Qingliang Gang seem to have mastered the whole effort that goes into growing rice. Lastly, there's the Longshan, with their pounded earth walls ringing their villages. There's also greater variety in animal bones, like chickens and goats now. They appear a bit later in the game, sometime after 3000 BC, and many sites were found built on top of Yangshao ruins, which of course begs the question, is this evidence of conquest? Or did the Longshan simply occupy these abandoned sites like the successors to the Indus Valley civilization did? Or, as is actually the thought now, the Longshan are simply the later development of the Yangshao culture. Oh, there's also the Dapenkeng in the southeast, who most likely headed to Taiwan sometime between 4000 and 3000 BC, although those dates could be wrong. But this isn't an anthropology episode, so we're just gonna walk away from that. However, this is a prehistory episode, which means all that I'm about to tell you comes from second-hand accounts, because Chinese writing won't be invented until the 2nd millennium BC. Could the people I'm about to introduce you to have existed? Absolutely. They could have absolutely have never existed. And if you've listened to the other episodes, you know I love me some semi-mythical historical folk. Remember the half-serpent Athenian king Cecrops? Yeah, stuff like that. The names of the earliest Chinese rulers come from many different texts, although some go with different rulers altogether, or even jumble up the order they rule. But for consistency's sake, I'm sticking with the great historian Sima Qian's accounts. The earliest traditions state that there was an age in China where the land was at peace, and humanity was progressing slowly towards civilization. Ruling over this time were the 3 sage kings, also called the 3 august ones, were the 3 sovereigns. Fu Xi is widely believed to be the first, and is credited with discovering trigrams by staring at the back of a great tortoise. These symbols are used in divination, telling the future, and were later collected and written down in the book The I Ching. Fu Xi also invented fishing nets, created marriage, and outlawed incest. Seems like it would go without saying, but you want to make sure your early society isn't all in the same gene pool. Now the next sovereign is up for debate. Some texts say it's Nuwa, Fu Xi's wife or sister. Some say it's a different guy named Sui Ren. So here's a brief look at what they each did. Nuwa might be Fu Xi's sister or his wife, but not his sister wife. She's responsible for instituting societal rules, how a parent should treat a child, how spouses should treat each other, that sort of thing. And she also takes on a goddess-like quality with tales of her repairing the wall of heaven and repopulating the earth with clay humans after a terrible disaster. Sui Ren, on the other hand, is noted for his discovery of fire. Kind of an important thing, but that's all you really need to know about them. Last of the 3 sovereigns is Shen Nong, who taught the ancient Chinese about agriculture, how to build a plow, and the value of farming. Before him, it is said people would simply forage for food and eat whatever was lying around, but Shen Nong instructed the people about the importance of growing crops, specifically the 5 sacred grains. Again, there's some debate over what 5 make the list. One version says it's millet, rice, adzuki beans, which if you've ever eaten red bean paste, that's where it comes from, soybeans, and wheat. But other versions include barley, sesame, peas, and hemp. It's all good. Shen Nong also taught about the medicinal properties of herbs and plants, learning what ingredients did what by eating them. From this method, he discovered tea, which is good, but after eating a yellow flower, his intestines ruptured and he died, which is bad. This plant, by the way, is called Duang Chang Sao, or organ-breaking herb, and as far as I can tell, it doesn't exist. But Shen Nong was venerated because he gave his life to better mankind, and in death was bestowed the title, the Medicine King. Shen Nong may have also been the progenitor of a tribe whose leaders took the name Yan Di, the Flame Emperor. They kept the peace in the region, but became progressively less capable over time, about 500 years or so. At the time of the last Yandi, their power was so weak that other smaller tribes refused to pay tribute and would fight each other for territory. It's at this point that we enter the age of the 5 emperors, starting with one of the greatest figures in Chinese lore, Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. Yellow refers to the earth, associated with the yellow loess silt mentioned earlier. He was blessed with supernatural intelligence and the ability to talk shortly after his birth. Just roll with it. And was able to subdue the warring tribes and convince them to join him. The Yellow Emperor is also supposed to be the brother to the Flame Emperor, but he learns that his brother was attempting to reconquer the smaller tribes. To stop this, the Yellow Emperor goes to war. Well, first he invents warfare, and then he goes to war. Minor detail. After defeating the Flame Emperor, he defeats the last remaining unruly tribe, led by a monster named Chiyo, and he's officially named Huangdi, the Yellow Emperor. He's got a bunch of inventions and discoveries under his belt, but let's spend a moment talking about his wife, the Empress Lei Zhu. According to tradition, she was enjoying a cup of tea in her garden when a worm fell into her cup. Gross, I know, but Lei Zhu noticed a fiber protruding from it and saw that it stretched across the garden. She followed it, wrapping the fiber around her finger until she discovered the source, a cocoon on a mulberry tree. Now you can guess where this is going. Lei Zhu is not just the traditional discoverer of silk, but the industrial ancestor of sericulture, the silk industry, which entails the harvesting of mulberry leaves for the silkworms, the silk looms, the boiling of cocoons, the weaving, etc. This is obviously a story, but regardless of who first discovered silk, it doesn't change the fact that silk became big business for China, and was therefore a closely guarded state secret. Anyone caught selling or giving away sericulture information was sentenced to death. The Yellow Emperor's reign ends at around 2600 BC, a date reached by generations of scholars, but who can say for sure? Following up was his grandson, or great-grandson, Xuan Xu, who put down an uprising from a descendant of the Flame Emperor, and then the Emperor Ku, of which I really couldn't find much information. Upon Ku's death, his son Yao becomes emperor. He's regarded in Chinese folklore as the epitome of a good ruler. He lived simply, took an earnest concern for his citizens, invented or updated the calendar, and all in all lived a good life. But perhaps his greatest achievement was not simply giving the throne to a family member. Realizing his sons happened to all be pampered yutzes, Yao knew he had a responsibility to his people to find a better heir. So he asks around his court who would like to be emperor, but everybody graciously declines. One court minister, however, informs Yao that he knows of a poor peasant by the name of Shun, whose mother died when he was young, and whose stepmother and stepbrother were cruel to him. His father, being elderly and blind, does nothing to help his son, but Shun still honors his family anyway. Emperor Yao was impressed, but wanted to make sure he really was as good as the stories say he is. To test Shun's character, Yao gives 2 of his daughters to Shun and makes him governor of a district. And Shun, true to his character, treats them well and governs wisely. Even when his stepmother and stepbrother become jealous and try to assassinate him, Shun remains calm and forgives them. Yao is convinced, and when he died, Shun becomes emperor, let's say in mid-2200s BC. That concludes the history of the 3 August ones and the 5 emperors, but we've only just begun to scratch the surface of China's history. Shun might be the last of the semi-mythical sage kings, but what will he do now that he's on the throne? Would he appoint his own son as heir, or follow in Yao's footsteps and appoint the best candidate for the job? You'll find out next time as we explore China's first dynasty on the podcast History of Our World.